Oh, there we go. So I want to start with a couple thank yous. Specifically thanking ProRata because you worked with me for the last year to help kind of develop this sustainability education structure. Because I spent a lot of time thinking like I don't know how to educate people, and you gave me time and space to do that. So I really appreciate that, and then we're able to offer it back to the community. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it's been very helpful to have that time and for us as an organization to reflect on the idea of sustainability in general, and then ways that it can be actionable just even in small pieces
Yeah.
for a small theater company with zero budget.
Well, and I think really approaching it from like just a solid year of education,
Mhm.
which is kind of what the intent of this training series is, except in the expanded hour format. Because I think there's so many things that people have to learn about sustainability that it's like, let's not rush to like a solution. Let's just take time to educate, which can be hard
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
have the patience for that.
for sure. Because we
Um,
are like, we all want to do stuff. We're like, let's fix the problem now. And
It's a problem. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, I also want to thank United States Institute of Theater Technology, USITT, for the online registration and recording of this. So you'll be able to see this recording on USITT's YouTube channel and any previous sessions if you missed any, and any of the upcoming sessions as well. Some introductions. If you've seen some of the other video recordings, you're probably familiar with my face. I will be the through line through these training series. I'm Sadie Ward. I'm a local theater artist and designer. I work with Schuler Shook as a theater specialist, and I helped start the Minneapolis chapter of the Broadway Green Theater Alliance. And this is kind of our education series, one of the big initiatives that I think that the Alliance can do. Um, Karen, I'll let you
Uh,
introduce yourself.
sure. I'm Karen Bratley Weathern. I'm the artistic director of Theater Pro Rata, who is one of the small theater companies in Minneapolis. We've been around for about 25 years and have known Sadie
Mhm.
for quite a long time. We've been working together as a director and a designer.
Yeah,
Uh,
on a number of shows,
yeah, quite a
probably at
few,
least 5.
at least.
Yeah, so,
But that's so this is sort of an expansion of an ongoing relationship.
yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of people are trained with the mentality of good, fast, cheap, choose two, which I think automatically sets us up with this mindset of us being trained in theater that like uh it's either at the expense of humans and your time, it's going to be expensive, or the materials are going to be tossed or expensive or something like that. It just kind of creates this overall kind of capitalistic view of how we approach theater and how we put so much into it as well. That I actually like to like start this by saying, let's stop saying this. I don't like this phrase. It puts us at detriment when we keep saying this
Mhm.
phrase.
Well, and it also gives us this idea that you cannot have like all three is not possible.
Right.
That it's just like you're just gonna have to you're gonna have to either pay for it or you're just not gonna get anything.
Well, and I think it has conditioned us to think that there's only like one kind of success.
Mhm.
And it's like a very like visual materialistic kind of success, when I think that like we have the ability to define success for ourselves. So like stop using phrases such as this. So we're going to start this presentation kind of focusing on the material side of sustainability, because as I said, most people, when they think sustainability, they automatically jump to that material side of sustainability, which I think is a very natural place to start because we are, since kindergarten taught to recycle your cans and your plastic bottles. Like we're taught that material aspect of sustainability first. But it's not the only way to define sustainability. And I think in a lot of ways, specifically in theater as well, when we start to expand sustainability into the human side of things, it really makes us think of it in a multidimensional way, which is part of the reason that I say every theater company has to define sustainability for themselves, which is why I think it's so great that ProRata has taken this approach of really focusing on human
Mhm.
sustainability. And I also like to avoid focusing on strictly material sustainability because I think it puts it a lot on the designers to solve the problem. And when you start like going beyond like material sustainability, you really start to think holistically as a company. and how we're treating people and how we're spending our time. Because theater is really unique because like the art form is humans. And if we're not taking care of humans in the process, it's pretty hypocritical.
Well, and it's the like theater itself, the essence of theater is that moment of connection between the audience and
Mm,
the artists on stage. And
mhm,
yes, set is important. And yes, all of that and the words that you're speaking, all those things are important, but really it is there's theater is a moment that is meant to be experienced live and in real
mhm,
time.
mhm,
It's not a film, it's not TV, it's not a book, it's something that is it is it's a sand mandala that we
mhm.
wipe away
Yeah.
when we're done, as soon as we're done creating it.
Yeah, I remember in high school, one of my high school theater directors said it's the only art form that you can watch disappear in front of your eyes as you're experiencing it.
Mhm.
And so like that's to me the beautiful like layering of like humanity of theater.
Mhm.
So like let's take care of humans in the process.
Sure.
But when you are focusing on material sustainability, I like to when we're talking about how can I be more sustainable in theater? I like to think of this again in terms of mindset and like, let's start asking questions because there's no like single way that I can say, do this and now you're sustainable. Congratulations. Because what we know now will be different in 5 years. So there's quite a few, these are just a couple questions that you can start to really question like your material choices in a production. Like, why are we making these decisions to use resources to tell this story? Because for me, I think that strengthens my choices as a designer when I say, well, it makes more sense to use this material because it actually makes sense instead of like the joke is like painting wood to look like wood.
Yeah.
So really thinking of like how are your materials helping tell the story really emphasizes that. And with some of these questions around material sustainability, they can be both quantitative and tangible as well, in terms of like there are the kind of aesthetic questions of like how are we telling the story, but then there's also the literal like how much are we spending, how much did we throw away. You can be very literal and like weigh what you're throwing away, um if that's the approach that you want to take to things. So to me there's kind of like an access point of like you can be very technical with it or you can be more philosophical with it as well. I think the other thing to think of that I like to keep in mind when we're talking about material sustainability is avoiding scarcity thinking. Because I think in a lot of ways in like traditional training, we get focused on like the things that I don't have. And when you start focusing on what are the materials I do have to help me tell this story, it's going to open up a lot more possibilities instead of being like, oh, but if I just had the flat and the wall, this would be so much better. Like that is kind of a mental trap that you get
And
in.
it really does have to be especially I think for leadership and as a director,
Mhm,
I have a responsibility to like be open-minded about the possibilities of the set, not
mhm,
set designer bring me a rendering and a model
mhm,
and make that happen on stage exactly like that.
mhm.
Like I need to be like, it's gonna be maybe it'll be a classroom, and how much of a fully realized classroom, we don't know yet. And
Right,
what is it going to just be a chalkboard?
right,
Maybe, and
right.
that's okay.
Yeah. I think leading with the concept is always going to emphasize the story rather than saying, I need this singular thing. And now I need the materials to achieve that singular thing. When you start with a concept, it's going to make stronger choices in storytelling. So there's going to be a kind of a couple slides to go through of just some kind of topics with material sustainability. Life cycle analysis is one thing that I encourage anyone that if you're using traditional materials, because like theater comes in all forms, it's not like traditional building methods are just going to disappear overnight or anything like that. But the life cycle analysis is really taking your material from like when you get it as a raw material, thinking of what you did to it, and then thinking through how you're disposing of it and really thinking of it as a circular process, is one approach to start to understand, um, where are my materials coming from and what am I doing with them? Because I think a lot of people think I got the thing and now I'm throwing it away, but there is that middle point of like, what am I doing to it
Mm.
in the middle? Because there's lots of choices that you can make that make it still more usable beyond just the single use item. I think that a lot of other industries have also figured out this life cycle analysis quite a bit better than theater has at this point, just in terms of understanding how things come apart and break down. So I think that with life cycle analysis, some of the initial questions that you can be asking yourself is what goes into making this product, and that can be time and material and chemical and all the aspects of it. What are you doing like to the material? Like, are you altering it in any way and can you salvage it? So when you start to think of it in the circular process instead of I used the thing and now it's going in the trash, it just opens up your thinking a lot more. So kind of dovetailing off of life cycle analysis, the phrase that I use a lot is designing with disposal in mind. So when you center your choices on the fact of like, I know that this is going to be a 3-week production. I'm not building anything to last this long. If you lead with the fact that I know it's going to go someplace after this, you start to think of it differently.
And sometimes it can be just as little as like painting it with a water soluble paint instead of an oil-based paint.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
know, it's
Yeah. And I think when I think of designing with disposal in mind, I also think of it in terms of like, am I designing in stock sizes?
mhm.
Can I pull from stock? Can I borrow something instead of feeling the like, I need the thing and now I'm going to build the thing? It's like, can you find it someplace else and then return it to where it needs to go to avoid throwing it away? Because again, if you just like, sometimes we just like get to strike and we don't even think about it. And it's like, well, the dumpster's there, let's just put it there. But if you start from day one saying, I don't want this to go in the trash, what choices can I make along the way? It just frames your whole process a bit differently. And this is just kind of another infograph. This is straight up stolen from the Theater Green Book because I like to sprinkle these images throughout these presentations to say, go read the Theater Green Book. And it's just another kind of visual of making and disposal. A common topic with sustainability and materials is using alternate materials because we have traditional building methods. Like I went to school and I learned how to build a flat. I had the little stagecraft book. But again, there's lots of materials that exist in the world that we can be using in theater. We've just been taught how to make theater. And so I like to say that when you start to expand your materials choices, again, tying things to the message of the show, you're kind of expanding your paint palette in a way.
And also it gives you some freedom to be a little more creative because I think in school we have this like everybody is when you go to school, when you go to college for theater, you have access to this big shop with all these supplies and you have access to this budget and this rehearsal space and this like there's all this stuff that you have access to
Mhm.
that you just use because it's there and then when you get out in the real world that doesn't exist anymore for 99% of theater makers
Yeah.
and so finding ways to be creative and not have to sacrifice an artistic vision or an idea or a moment like the impact of a show
Mhm.
what by but not having all of that stuff
Mhm.
that's again it's a it takes a little more time to think about it but it allows for more creativity
Yep.
and a more open-minded approach to theater.
And I think it also ties into some more like direct commentary of
Mhm.
like our day-to-day lives as well. Because I think one of my common examples is the pop bottle curtain that I've used in productions of SpongeBob and Little Mermaid, because then it also ties into this like, yeah, there's this much plastic that it's not hard to gather this many water bottles, and then it puts this layer of commentary on top of things too. So again, this is another way to kind of avoid that scarcity mindset and lean into like what materials are available. Like what could I make if I had 1,000 coat hangers? You know, it's kind of exciting sometimes when you think about it. I'm a huge proponent of rental and stock because it reduces use of new materials. It has a place to go back to after strike. And it also supports a circular economy because generally when you are renting or pulling from stock, you're helping someone else financially in the process. Like this lovely set that we're on has many
Yeah.
rented items.
It's almost all like there is almost all the I think all the furniture, I'm just looking at it, you can't see it all, unfortunately. We have 3 tables, we have 2 bar stools, we have a bench, we have a like a bar unit thing, and all of those are rented
Mhm.
pieces.
Mhm.
So we will not keep and store those things because
Right,
we don't have much storage space. We also will not throw them away.
right.
They're going to go back to the place that they came from, and they're going to get reused in future shows because they're stock pieces.
And, like, the money that would have otherwise gone into building something goes to a fellow theater
Mhm.
and supports the overall ecosystem, which I think is great too. And I think crowdsourcing is kind of another great way to kind of gather materials or think of materials alternatively. Things that I know that I have gathered for productions are toilet paper tubes, water bottles, blue jeans. Those are just a couple things in the last 2 or 3 years. And because I kind of start to think of it in terms of like, what is a thing that if I make a Facebook post, I can just get a lot of,
Yeah.
and then I can alter it and work with it. And what I think is unique about crowdsourcing is it increases this kind of engagement aspect. I don't want to undermine, like, it is a lot of work. Like, and this is why I'm tying into like the human side of things, right? Because that's why this like material side and the human side kind of live in tension with each other. Cause I know when I'm going to do a crowdsourced production with alternate materials, I'm going to be putting more time into it.
Mhm.
And usually when I'm crowdsourcing, I'm also like doing extra steps afterwards to make sure that they're recycled in the way that they need to be. But in the shows where I've been able to do that, people are like, "Oh my gosh, that thing is like so interesting. Like I gave you my toilet paper tubes. I want to see pictures of it." So there's this like interesting trade-off of like theater is this collaborative and community building thing, and this is a great way to engage community that might not otherwise be involved with design and tech kind of opportunities.
And then you're acknowledging that there is often more time invested
Mhm.
in those goals and ideals.
And it's kind of a great educational moment to be like, this show has made different choices. Be cognizant of the other shows where you don't know where that stuff is going afterwards, and you don't have a designer saying, I'm going to compost this afterwards. And then kind of the final slide and kind of this materials sustainability side of things is chemicals in production. Um, Now I have kind of a philosophy that because like we do live in a world where we have to, use glue and paints and things like that. That you should start with the least toxic and work to the most toxic, in terms of like uh let's not just jump to E6000 glue. Like, can you glue something together in a different with a different material like that isn't going to be so toxic? And if that first attempt fails, then you can progress through that, but don't go to the most toxic thing first. And I think of like chemicals in production, um, kind of starts to symbolize kind of the crossover then that we get into human sustainability because it's not just about like the chemicals that we are releasing into the environment, but it's the chemicals that we expose ourselves to through the process. So being just very mindful and kind of constantly questioning yourself of like, do I really need to be using this chemical to achieve whatever texture, treatment, adhesive thing that I'm doing? So with that bridge, we're going to start talking about human sustainability. So we had a couple nuggets around material sustainability, but now we want to kind of focus on the human side of sustainability a little bit. Um, so again, leaning into phrases that we have
Oh
been
my god.
raised on.
This was when you had mentioned that like pro rata is taking the human sustainability thing. That's
Mhm,
something of all the trainings that we've done with you. That's the one that really spoke to our heart as something that not only was mission centered for us, but also something that we cared about. Because one of the things that we've always felt is that the people who work on our shows are our greatest asset, that
mhm,
those human beings are the thing that is the most valuable. And so this coming in from this idea of the play must go on, this like th- we've there it's a joke in movies and things that's just like you got, no matter what, by hook or by crook, it's gonna happen.
yeah,
And it inevitably, what that means is that it's going to happen at the expense of the human beings
yeah,
involved,
yeah,
that there's going to be boundaries that are going to be pushed
And crossed.
and like with time, with people's safety, with people's health,
Mhm.
people put and just like it investing so much of themselves into making it happen, especially if a problem happens, if something goes wrong, and then you're like, well, we got to fix it. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. And then you're there till 3 in the morning trying to fix this problem.
Yeah,
And it's so easy to fall into that trap. And
yeah.
I've fallen into that trap. It,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think you almost it's almost like we're conditioned to do it
yeah.
at first because it's almost like something that you have to live through sometimes to be
Mhm.
like, I don't want to do that
Yeah.
again.
I remember once as a stage manager early in my career before I was directing, where I called a show and I was so sick and I had a fever and I was lying on the floor of the booth with my book in my I was on my side with my book like this calling the show.
Wow.
And I was like, why did I do that? Because it never occurred to me that I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Sometimes I think of like one of the silver linings that came out of the pandemic is that we learned that the show doesn't have to go on. Like we as an entire industry learned how to cancel a show
Yeah.
and that we lived. Like,
It's
you know,
just a play.
yeah. And my colleague Luke Granholm, who I've done some presentations with, he says the operative word is play. Like
Mhm.
if you're not playing, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we forget that, but we've also been like conditioned to like, if it's really art, I'm going to do the thing because the play must go on. So things to be aware of. Um, in terms of how we're conditioned and then starting to balance it with how do we question the things that we've been
Mhm.
conditioned to do. There's just certain aspects of like human sustainability that are like pretty universally experienced by theater people, like whether you're directing, stage managing, acting, or tech. Like theater is so notorious for burnout that it's like it's just like understood.
Yeah, it's just a thing that happens.
Yeah. And I think I can't remember if you were the person that introduced me to the hard versus harmful phrase.
I know we talked about it, but I don't
Okay.
know if but it's definitely something that I think is true, this idea that's like theater is hard work. It does require hard work and it requires a level of dedication and a level of responsibility. And when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. And
Mhm.
so there, like, I think that some folks have who are newer to theater may be it's just like, oh, this is hard, so therefore I'm not going to do it. It's like,
Mhm.
no, so it's like there's a balance between hard work and this is something that we're committed to and we're going to figure this out versus the show must go on and we're hurting our bodies to make
Yeah.
this happen and we're crossing boundaries and we're being unsafe and unhealthy.
Yeah.
Like there is a line between those two things.
And this is like a framework that I started using. I'm pretty certain it's you that introduced me to this. Like when I am feeling that like crunchy burnout, oh my God, I'm tired. Why am I doing this? This is the question that I start to ask
Mhm.
myself now is like, is this hard or is this harmful?
Mhm.
And that's been such a great like framing tool for myself of like, it's hard, but I'm okay doing it versus like, no, this is like causing damage and I need to like course correct in this moment
Mhm.
because I can't do this for another 3 weeks
Yeah.
or whatever it may
Yeah.
be. Um, so acknowledging that burnout is a thing is kind of the first steps of human sustainability, starting to frame it as is it hard versus harmful? And I worked in HR in theaters for 7 years, and I like to just kind of emphasize like labor laws exist for a reason,
Yeah. Well,
right?
Parada has always, from the very beginning, followed equity rules, even
Hmm.
though we don't use equity actors.
Hmm.
I'm like, best practices. Let's use that framework because that is the best practice in terms of how we treat our actors.
Hmm.
So, we have breaks, a 10-minute break every hour and a half.
Yeah.
We have rehearsals start at this time, they end at this time. We have, like we don't do these rehearsals till 1 and 2 in the morning, just sort of note sessions forever. It's like those are basic best practices
Yeah.
that you can follow labor laws and you
Hmm.
can pay attention to those rules and you can and that is it just requires thinking about it and knowing it in advance.
Yeah, and I think that because like Parada is really great in terms of like leaning into those standards, but sometimes I'm surprised when I am freelancing around town and like I see a theater like doing something where I'm like, ooh, little questionable. Ooh. Like just because we're labeled contractors, I still wouldn't do it that way. So always kind of leaning on that baseline of like, what's the law? And just because this is art doesn't mean that we need to not follow these best practices. So, and again, kind of leaning into like, as we're starting to question and like lean into our self-awareness of human sustainability, like let's just start asking questions, right? Like we might be in a scenario where we're like, are we being sustainable with our humans? Because I think there's just some questions that you can be like, everyone seems really tired and mad right now. Maybe we should examine this. And then like there's some like again kind of that balance of like quantitative and qualitative questions as a theater company in terms of like how are you doing with human sustainability? Like do you have a lot of returning artists or do you have like a churn of new artists in
Also,
a
do
way
you
that
only have young artists who don't know any better coming and working for your
Mhm.
company?
Yeah. And so like those are some aspects that you can start to question. It is some thunder in here right now.
Yeah.
They were not joking that it was going to rain tonight. Um so yeah, again just kind of leaning into like how can I start to question things that help me open up like different perceptions of just because I've been doing it this way doesn't mean it's necessarily.
I appreciate that you mentioned tech, because I think that tech is one of those things where, because everything is coming together and there's a lot of high stress and there's a lot of things that are being juggled,
Mhm,
that tech rehearsals can be an experience that is that can be really hard and difficult.
mhm,
And so giving everybody a little extra grace inside those
mhm,
is, I think, super important. I know we had so for many years, Pro Rata followed the model, which was the 1 week of tech. You know, you
mm,
take over the space on Monday morning, or, you know, maybe if you're lucky, Sunday night. And then the designers are putting the setup on Monday, and then we're going to do a 10 out of 12 on Tuesday. And then we're going to tech week Wednesday, Thursday, we're going to open Friday. And so that we did that model like many theater companies in town do.
and I think quite a few theaters are doing a lot less of that after the
That's
pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had it was, I think, post-pandemic, it was fairly recently, went to our board and requested 1 more week of
Yeah.
rehearsal. And it's a hard sell to the board. It wasn't for our board because of
The
the
values
value of, but because when you're saying, give me another $1,500, $2,000
for a week in the
for a week
space.
in the space, and I'm not going to give you any added revenue
Right.
because there's no performances happening. There's no revenue benefit. There's just added expense.
Yeah.
And but when I pitched it to the board, I said, it gives our designers breathing room. It gives our actors space. It also helps us eliminate the 10 out of 12, because
Mhm.
instead of the 10 out of 12 on a Tuesday, now we're doing 2 straight 6s on Saturday and Sunday,
Mhm.
which we can do from like 10 to 4, and everyone can be home in time for dinner. And we actually got an extra 2 hours of tech
Yeah.
with 2 straight 6s, because that's 12 hours of tech
Instead of 10 on
instead of
12.
10 out of 12.
Yeah.
So and it's on a weekend, it's on weekend, so it's not impacting people's day jobs, which, let's be real, everybody has in theater.
Yeah.
And the it also allows us just more time in the space, gives everybody breathing room, gives everybody time. And I mean, our board immediately was like, yes, let's make that happen. But I think that you have to look at it in that, like, can we rethink, just because we've always done 1 week of tech, do
Yeah.
we always have to, what is the benefit of having 2 weeks of tech?
And I think kind of what the example that you gave in terms of like going to the board and asking for more money is kind of like back to that um good, fast, and cheap, right?
Yeah.
Like we are only defining success in a financial way. But let's stop and question that, right? Like, because if all of this like is a methodology to like say, is this sustainable? What questions can I ask myself? I'm looking around, I'm seeing crabby people. What actually is in my power to change something to make it better for people in the process rather than just continuing to crunch it out?
And becomes worth that investment, because we
Mhm.
do live in a capitalistic society, and the board is like, here's the budget, and you're asking for another $2,000.
Yeah.
Where is that worth it? And the answer is yes, when we value people's time.
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
value people's health and we value people's sanity.
Yeah.
And then what that does is that makes, I think, for a better product in the end,
Yeah.
even though it's not as quantifiable.
Right. And that's kind of like that we get to define our success.
Mhm.
And I think part of that success is also like the artist going through the process and not feeling like a tired sock afterwards.
Yeah.
Because when your artists are a tired sock, they're not going to show up to opening. That's
No.
just a fact.
Yeah.
So like you're going to have a better overall experience when your artists are rested. Time is finite and sneaky. We've
Yeah.
been kind of talking about time kind of as we've been chatting, but like really like thinking about time in the process of making theater, it's incredibly time consuming
Mhm.
to make theater. Like I remember like my first tech back after 2 years of no tech with the pandemic, and I was like, oh my God, how did we do this?
It's
Like
been
I'm
a good
supposed to
time.
do this in a week? What? And it's like that was kind of like my first reality of being able to like question like, well, that's the way we did it, but I'm not okay doing it that way
Mhm.
anymore. And like time in all aspects of the production as well, in terms of like rehearsal time, but then it's like time to travel to rehearsal. Like there's an immense amount of time that goes into making theater.
Well, this is when I taught for a little while, and I would get, yeah, actually quite a while, and I was this was in the early aughts, and I was making like $35 an hour, and I was like, that's a huge amount of money. But then I was like, oh, it's for a 45-minute class. It's going to take me half an hour to drive there and half an hour to drive home, and I'm going to have to spend an hour working on my lesson plan and my
Hmm.
rubric beforehand.
Hmm.
And so when you start thinking about that whole component, $35 an hour is not that much money.
Well, and I think
It's
of like actors like learning lines too. Like it's this whole like mysterious like thing that like they just show up and they have their lines memorized. That's not
that's
how it
no,
actually happens. Like you have to sit and do that. Like that's time.
we on this production, we did a little survey. I asked artists to catalog their time.
Hmm.
And we did it with a Google form, and I sent them an email reminder every Sunday to just go back and like broad, high level, count how many hours you spent working on the show
Yeah. And I
in
think
all the components.
that's such a brave thing for you to do as a theater company, because I feel like so many times we've been in a position where it's like I don't even want to count my hours because
Mhm.
I'm going to be making like $2 an hour.
Yeah.
So like I commend Pro Rata for doing that step because it is like a hard thing to look at
Well,
sometimes.
and it really, I think, puts in a quantifiable sense, it puts an amount on that. So
Hmm.
last week, because I checked actually before this thing, I
Hmm.
checked from last week, and I don't know if every artist actually did the surveys because I was not responsible for the surveys.
Hmm.
We decided that we didn't want me as producer,
Hmm.
who's the person writing the checks, to have knowledge of the time, just to not like allow, so people wouldn't feel like, oh, Karin's checking up on me,
Yeah.
or I didn't spend as much time running lines as somebody else did. So therefore, like it's not about competition and it's not about catching up. Our board chair as a neutral party
Hmm.
is in charge of that.
Hmm.
But I checked in with him last week, and I was like, how many hours have been spent on this show? And at this point, 815 hours
Yeah.
of artist hours have gone into, and just artist hours in working on the show.
Yeah. And that's like amazing and impressive and overwhelming at the same
Mhm.
time to think about. So like really acknowledging time
Yeah.
is like a real thing. Um,
Well, and that's coming back. I know just one more thing I want to say
yeah.
about time is this idea of work, play, rest.
Hmm.
So there is this idea that you want to spend 8 hours a day working, 8 hours a day resting, and 8 hours a day sleeping
Hmm.
or play. So sorry, rest, play. So work, play, rest, 8 hours of each.
Hmm.
And the rest is like sleeping, and work is working. And theater counts as work, even though it's fun,
Hmm.
because it's a place you have to go to, it's a responsibility, it is a thing, like the part of your brain and the part of your body that is, it's falls under the category of work. So if we are working an 8-hour job
Hmm.
and then going to rehearsal at night and away from our house for 12 hours, that's offsetting that balance in a way that's not sustainable or healthy. And it's like, it's okay to make the choices to do that, but you need to recognize that is where burnout comes from.
And in a lot of ways, like I like look at what actors and directors and stage managers go through in a rehearsal process, and I'm like, I don't know how you do that. Like, like as a designer, there's a certain amount of things that I can do in my head, or
Mhm.
do at a computer sitting. And I have a different kind, and this is true for the different design disciplines that manifests differently. But I think again, really acknowledging the time that goes into making theater is so important, and it's very sneaky because it comes out in other ways too. So there's some patterns in theater because we know that there's theater just has a bad reputation for
Mhm,
abuse.
mhm.
And unfortunately there's some systemic problems that create pathways for abuse. I think a lot of that is kind of really rooted in power imbalances
Yeah.
in theater because I think a lot of traditional theater has a very hierarchical structure. I think we know why because
Mhm.
it's like I'm the director, so we're going to do the thing. But I think when you really start to look at that as a systemic problem, you can see why it's repeated so
Yeah.
frequently. Um,
Well, I think it can be repeated because when you're working on a show, if you're uncomfortable with the process or you're not it like if things feel weird and you get the oogie feeling from the show,
mhm.
um, you just don't work for that company again or
I'm just gonna
that
like,
director.
I'm gonna suck it up and
I'll
I'm
just
never
power
gonna do it
through.
again.
Yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
power through and then I'll be done.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, and not that it's anybody's responsibility to solve the problem, but that doesn't change the problem. It just kicks the can down the curb.
Mhm.
And so and then we have these problems that just keep going, and we have these cycles that just continue because each pocket of art is an isolated community that's being
Yeah.
built.
Yeah. And I think it's also kind of like uh the other end of that spectrum of like I'll just get through the show. There's the other side of the spectrum which is like, well, but this is what I'm going to do and I'm just going to crunch down and keep doing it harder.
Yeah.
That's the other side of how abuse happens and like we start to like take advantage of people
Mhm,
in that
mhm.
way. Um and I think that kind of over time, we have different patterns of seeing different kinds of abuse that have happened in different eras and learning from that, but then also repeating them as well.
Well, and that's something that I'm concerned about is this idea of like, because we have new companies starting up, that there is the a lot of institutional knowledge has been lost,
Hmm.
and a lot of there was this in the early 90s, there was this real wild west of theater
Hmm.
making in town where people were just doing all sorts of crazy crap, and everybody was doing their own thing and making their own rules, and nobody was questioning it, and now that's where a lot of these abuses started to
Hmm.
like have come from. And now we are in this situation where a lot of those companies have um, folded. A lot of those artists who are mid-career artists have moved on to other fields because it's just the work is like, we can't do it anymore. I'm giving up on this. I'm moving on. And so that institutional knowledge has been lost, and now we're back to this place of a whole bunch of new little companies starting up that maybe don't know any better.
Well, and that is the systemic problem,
Yeah.
right? Is that there is no other alternative than to leave
Yeah.
or just keep suffering. And that's
Mhm.
part of like let's stop and question this for a moment. Um, some other kinds of patterns of abuse that are like very like specific and identifiable. The reign of the artistic genius.
Oh my God. Yeah, there's so many, like, especially, these examples of John Clark Donahue and Garland Wright, that are people who were seen as having this like incredible artistic vision and were probably artistic geniuses. I mean, the show that made me want to be a director was a Garland Wright show that I saw. It made me cry. It was so beautiful.
Hmm.
And then I heard about how he treated people.
Hmm.
And this like the show must go on. I have a vision and I'm going to make it happen by hook or by crook. And that happens on the backs of artists,
Yeah,
and in the case of John Clark Donahue, on the backs of child artists.
right.
I mean, it's just obscene the way that we used to tolerate that because we just didn't look, we didn't see it.
Right. And I think that there's that kind of like mystique of the genius
Mhm.
that you like uh you set it aside. And that's also part of that problem too, of like buying into like the mythology of art making is this like painful and, oh, but they're the genius, so I'll just follow them. We don't need to do that. We
You
can
don't,
stop doing
you
that.
don't need to do that anymore.
Um,
Oh, this is mine, this
Mhm.
artistic band. So I think there's also to like the lesser extent of the auteur, is the artistic vampire who is, and I bring this to the table because I was an artistic vampire and I was not aware of it. And it being artistically vampiric is this like asking and asking and asking and asking because you're so inside the experience and you don't even realize, and you're not taking the time to step outside and ask whether the like give more artistic things
Mhm.
is even a
Appropriate.
if it's appropriate,
Yeah.
yeah, or if it's necessary.
Or like respecting boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since you brought this up, I think it's such a great analogy. Because initially when you say vampire, it's like I'm a vampire, but it's like, well, actually you're attracted to vampires because they're charming and fun and
Mm-hmm.
delightful, right? Because
Yeah.
that's how they get you, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what Dracula did. And like when you start to think of it in like, because that when we say like artistic vampire, it makes it sound like someone is being mean, but I think layering into like you might not be aware of it.
Yeah. Because
It's
you're
like,
just asking for like, well, come on, can't we figure this out? Can't we solve this problem? Well, let's just stay 15 more minutes and figure this out.
yeah.
And you're both in it together. You're also,
Mhm.
you're not just like, make
That's
it happen. You're in it
it's
too.
that symbiotic
Yeah.
relationship that's developed
Mhm.
because again, like once you said this, I started thinking of like We Play in the Shadows with Taika Waititi, and
Yeah.
I'm like, we love that guy, and he's a vampire, and he's gonna make me
Yeah.
the undead,
Yeah.
which is scary. So
That's,
it's kind of that balance of like if we've got the reign of the artistic genius, which is someone that we might fear, the artistic vampire might be the person,
who
the
we want to let them suck our blood.
yeah. And like that, it can be hard when it's like theater is very collaborative, like,
Mhm.
and they might be your friend and you might not,
Yeah. And
that's the layers of how it's hard.
And a small theater, a scrappy little theater is just like looking for how do we put it together? How do we make it happen?
Mhm.
We're making art. We're making art. This is so exciting. We're making art.
Mhm.
And you're so wrapped up in the thrill of making it happen that you're not stepping back and saying, am I doing this in a way that is the most healthy and sustainable long term for the artists who are involved?
Right.
And are the choices to get that artistic vision are, do we need to have all of those things?
Right. Because that's part of being a vampire
Yeah.
is you just kind of keep going.
Well, I think like the learning lesson on this for me recently in this show, I keep pointing this one because it's here. So we were trying to work out whether or not we could do a projection idea,
Mhm.
and lights and set were absolutely on board with
Mhm.
this. Like, this is going to be great, really excited about it. And there were a couple other people who were like, I don't know, does it take away? Is it a thing we want to do? And Emmett said, well, we could try it. And I said, how much time is it going to take to put it together in a way that just to try it and then possibly cut it?
Right.
And then as the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I don't think that it's actually going to be something that's going to support the show. I think it's
Mhm.
ultimately going to detract or be distracting, and we shouldn't use it.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I appreciate that you really want this. I'm going to cut it before we invest the time in it. And he was like, okay. And we still used a little bit of projection in just like a couple little places that I
Mhm.
think are actually very impactful.
Mhm.
But we had the idea to use projection like throughout the entire show.
Yeah.
And it was this like really cool idea. But then it was like making that idea happen
Yeah.
would have invested so much time. And I was like, I don't want to take the chance
Yeah.
to then cut it.
Yeah.
So I was like, nope, we're just not going to do it. So
Yeah.
that's like a learning lesson, I think, from that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great example of like, just because it is a brilliant artistic idea doesn't mean that we have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's hard. It really is. Kind of like another kind of general pattern that we fall into kind of with different ways that like abuse happens, is like we've been so conditioned to be contractors that kind of going back to some of the examples you gave, like we just don't count our hours that go
Yeah.
into these things. Because when you're a contractor, you're paid the same amount regardless of how much time you put into things. And it creates this like very like ingrained cycle of just devaluing your time.
We have started a line item budget for overhire
Mhm.
for people for designer. That's like a blanket. Designers get this much money to hire outside help to come in.
Which is so huge.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was like, it took us 20 years to get to that, and I'm like, most companies don't do this, but just the idea of like, if my lighting designer is going to have somebody to come to help for 6 hours, that person is going to get paid.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's great to just like plan for that in part of your process
Mhm.
because like theater is this industry of prototypes, right?
Yeah.
Like this production of Book of Will is very different than another production of
Mhm.
Book of Will. Like it just is different. So it is hard to plan for that stuff when you're planning a
Yeah.
year and a half
And just
process
knowing that
out.
we're gonna have overhire, that it's a line item expense, it's part of the budget, and the designers have the discretion to use it or not use it at their will.
Yeah.
Um,
And then kind of tying this back into material sustainability that I've mentioned with the pop bottle curtain that I've done, like again, like in that own cycle of my own mind, it took a lot of time to make that pop bottle
yeah.
curtain. Like, and like even in the process of doing it, I was like, it's okay because I just really want to try this idea and I want to see what it looks like on
Mhm.
stage. Right. Like that's my example of like, yes, I did something interesting and unique and different with materials,
But it
but then
took
I
you 300 hours to make it.
not quite 300, but a couple of weekends.
Yeah.
So, and it did catch the light in really cool ways. I
Yeah.
will say that.
Oh, here's our like tracking the hours. Yeah, it's I think that starting to track hours and starting to pay attention to those hours, um, just even in like a let's just track it,
Mhm.
starts to identify it as a resource that is valuable.
Yeah,
Even if
definitely.
you're not like, okay, and we're going to pay people a living wage and we're going to pay people $50 an hour and we're going to do like even just like acknowledging that time is spent on these things.
It's the first step.
It's the first step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's that platform example.
I'm not sure. Maybe it'll come up in our conversation.
I know what this is. This is, we
Yes.
have not had a platform on our set in probably a decade.
Hmm.
The last time we did a show that had a platform in it
Hmm.
was a show that was My Sister in This House, where there was a huge important plot point where a character is murdered on the stairs going up to the second floor.
And stairs take a long time to build.
Stairs take a long time to build. Having a second level takes a long time to build. We have intentionally chosen not to put platforms on our stage
Hmm.
because of the time intensive, the amount of labor building it, the amount of money that goes into getting those and making them, and then the amount of time that it takes to break them down and get rid of them,
Hmm.
the legs, all of the stuff. We're just like, no platforms.
Hmm.
I don't want platforms in any of my shows. We don't need them. It's not necessary
Hmm.
unless it is like specifically has to be there because of the like a crucial plot point.
Right. And I think that's part of that. Like, well, because the script says it, I'm conditioned, like, as a contractor, it doesn't matter how much time it takes to do it.
Mhm.
Like, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, another kind of trap or way that abuse happens is this kind of like, well, someone asked me to do it, so I better do it
Mhm.
cycle. That's kind of part of that in other industries with billable time, we would call that scope creep,
Yeah.
where it's like I asked you a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and then it's like, actually, this is now suddenly huge, but I've somehow felt obligated to do this
Mhm.
because someone asked me to do it.
And wouldn't it be cool if this
Yeah,
blah 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 suddenly becomes this whole new element that
right.
wasn't originally a part of it?
Right. It kind of gets back to that idea of like, what is collaboration,
Mhm.
right? Is it like, that's a cool idea. Could we actually do it in this way so it's actually achievable? Like, kind of like back and forth. Because like the best kind of collaboration is when an idea comes up and you don't know who came up with the idea. But
And that's where the idea of avoiding being an auteur or an artistic vampire, like it falls on leadership, it falls on the director to be open and create a community in the room of collaboration that is like, I'm not going to just ask you and make you do things
right.
because I have the vision. I'm going to be open to you saying, no, that's not a sustainable, and that's not an idea that is,
I just can't put that time in.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's an okay answer.
And that's an okay answer. And you have to like make that like you have to show by that you have to show that in your rehearsal room every day
Yeah.
for people to feel truly comfortable.
Yeah. Great. Oh, keep plugging along. The PowerPoint is here to keep us going.
Yep.
You've mentioned a lot already about how leadership
Yeah.
drives a lot of like setting things in the setting expectations in the room, setting the atmosphere. And I think that that just becomes truer and truer because I feel like there's a trend of like removing the like hierarchical director, more collaborative approach. And I think yes, collaboration happens in that way, but there is a leader saying this is how we're going to do it.
Yes,
So,
ultimately, I mean, there's a reason why you don't have, for company every 5 years, somebody's like, why don't we get a bunch of companies together to go in on a space? Because we live in a capitalistic society and somebody has to have 51% of the rental contract.
mhm,
And nobody wants to, you all want to produce a show in those great months. Nobody wants to produce a show in June, July, and January.
yeah.
There is somebody ultimately needs to be making decisions and calling the shots and be responsible.
Mhm,
But I think inside that we as leaders have a responsibility to be demonstrating how we treat people. And that's not just how we treat people in the rehearsal room, but how we treat people in callbacks and how we respect people's time by
mhm,
planning the rehearsal schedule such that people are not, people know when they're going to be called. They're like, rehearsal is from 6:30 to 9:30. We're going to start at 6:30. We're going to end at 9:30. And that's like, there is a level of respect in all of those elements. And we as leaders are the ones who are like, I can say till I'm blue in the face, I want to have a sustainable set that's recycled. But if I insist on having things be a certain way and then that's not actually living that example.
right,
I'm just paying lip service to it.
right. Then it's a fine example of greenwashing. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think also like whoever the leader is also setting like what that power dynamic
Yeah.
is as well. In terms of like because I just really like your example of like also publicly acknowledging
Yeah.
mistakes as well, because it's
Yeah.
like that's also setting the example that other people can also make
Mhm.
mistakes, which is part of sustaining things to be.
Yeah.
Because like I try and do that too, where it's like, I said we could do this thing, I was wrong. Like we cannot do this thing. I own that I said something that cannot be done.
When I think when the leadership in the room acknowledges a mistake, that um there's a humility there
Hmm.
that is, I think, earns a lot of street cred
Hmm.
just by, recognizing that, but it also opens up to a collaborative experience. And I think that this rehearsal hats idea is because there is a lot. I mean, there's just natural because the director is the one who's making decisions about casting
Hmm.
and the producer is the one making decisions about hiring designers. Like there is a person who is in more of a power position.
Hmm.
And so being like, I always try when I'm producing a show and directing it, I'm wearing two hats at the same time. And I'm
Hmm.
always trying to be like, okay, I'm wearing my producer hat right now versus I'm wearing my director hat right now,
Hmm.
because sometimes they are two different conversations. And sometimes that's being able to say, this happened in rehearsals for this show. We were, our Jillian, our dialect coach was doing notes and she was giving notes as fast as she could. And she got right up to 9:30 and she looked at me and she said, can I have 5 more minutes? And I went, no,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to email your notes or like I was like, no, you cannot have
Yeah.
5 more minutes.
Yeah. And
Just,
that's that like follow through.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's producer hat. Because director would love to let you finish those notes.
Yeah.
But producer says no.
Which leads nice and cleanly into the idea of setting clear expectations,
Mhm.
right? Because the leader helps set some of those expectations up front, but like we've all been in situations where you're like, this is not what I was expecting whatsoever, which is part of what leads to like unsustainable things when you think your time commitment was going to be one thing and then it turns out to be another.
And I think that you also have to be really realistic about how much time actually is going to take. Like over budget your time
Yeah.
so that like you need to make sure that you're not running short on things. And every once in a while we do. It's like sometimes I mess up how I schedule
Mhm.
auditions, and I always schedule auditions. Like I do not do this like call everybody and we just sit around for 3 hours and I'll read people.
Mm,
Because I want people to come in, I want them to read two sides, and I want them to leave.
mhm.
And I want to make the decisions about what they're, the only problem with that is if somebody's late, then my schedule gets really messed up.
Yeah,
But but it's like having thought ahead about all those little elements shows a respect for people's time that
yeah,
is really important. And that leads that idea of like, when you do a show with me, your time is going to be respected and valued. I'm going to tell you when you're going to be there. I'm not going to be texting you at 10 o'clock at night.
yeah,
It's just like, I, your time is your time. We all have life outside of theater,
yeah.
and family and life comes first,
Mhm, mhm.
and we can balance. It's tricky to balance those things, and we can do our best to balance them by being really pragmatic about how we schedule our time, I think.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned also about not texting at like 10 o'clock at night,
Mhm.
that kind of goes into like, again, setting expectations of like, no, we have boundaries and we maintain them
Yeah.
for reasons
Mhm.
because that keeps us healthy and
Yeah.
sane. And I think also acknowledging not just broad communication, but like preferred communication
Mhm.
methods too. Because if you're pushing someone to communicate in a style that maybe isn't their preferred style, you're like pushing on their
Mhm.
gas in a different way than if it's like, what is your preferred way to communicate? Do you prefer phone calls or do you prefer emails? Like maybe don't send a 11 o'clock email because
Mhm.
that is also another like, let's just set the expectation that I'm not
Yep.
going to be sending that kind of late night communication.
I sometimes think thoughts and write emails at 11 o'clock, and then
Mhm.
I schedule it to send at 9:05.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I try not to send emails in the middle of the night because I don't want people to think that I am available to receive emails and will respond
Yeah.
at
It goes
11
both
o'clock at
ways.
night. It's
Yeah.
like those boundaries are like, no, we're gonna, yeah.
Yeah. How do we talk about these harmful things as a group? So, kind of going back to that idea of like hard versus harmful, I think a little
Mhm.
bit, but like, um, I think it's also in that like developing culture within a group, because like every person's experience is individual. But sometimes if we don't talk about things, that's how systems and cycles are perpetuated at
Yeah.
the same time.
Well, and that's what we have with the isolated and the ephemeral nature of theater is like, you come together, you do this show, and then it's done. And
Hmm.
so if you're not being intentional about that time, then if there's a problem, that problem just stays long term.
Yeah.
And like, not, having there, if we don't talk about things or we don't communicate things. And again, I think that this is something that a leadership has to
Hmm.
model, because if leadership is not okay with people talking about problems, or if, like, no, this isn't an appropriate time or place to talk about a problem, that stifles that conversation.
Hmm.
And so even if it makes leadership uncomfortable, I think it's important to be open for when those conversations are going to happen.
Yeah, and I think of this kind of in layers as well when we say how do we talk about harmful things as a group, because I think that there's like kind of the micro of it in terms of like a singular production,
Mhm.
like how do you create that kind of atmosphere in kind of a short period of time, but then when you start thinking of things in community layered
Yeah.
out, like how do we start talking about these things?
Well, and this brings us into like people who are abusers, or people, like the whisper network of
Hmm.
like, oh, well, I'm just not going to work with that person because they did this thing to my friend.
Hmm.
And that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, it gets back to that, like, you can't sustain that as a system,
Yeah.
right? That's not a sustainable process if we're like, "Just don't do that." It's like, how do you start to talk about these things in a way where it's like, "We need to talk about this," but, like, it's difficult.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hard versus harm. I think we've covered this slide.
I think so.
Yeah, I think we got that one. Uh,
Oh, look, there's a
rehearsal
rehearsal
does
count.
work.
Yep.
I think we got that.
We got all over our slides.
Yeah. Pay equity. I do think that this is, a common thing that a lot of people talk about in theater.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. It's a really interesting place because most theater is not actually paying people a good amount of money.
Right.
Um, but I also think that there is a bit of a myth that like there I don't know any small theater that is getting, that the artistic director is some fat cat getting rich off of the backs of labor.
Hmm.
Like, I don't get paid to be the artistic director of Theater Parada.
Hmm.
Like, that's a volunteer position. I mean, I get paid, I think, $100 a month,
Hmm.
just to do the admin work. Like, it
Hmm.
is a volunteer position, and it
Hmm.
has been the whole time. That's why I
Yeah.
have a day job.
Yeah.
And that's true for most small theaters. I
Yeah.
think that it's um there there is it means like, well, if there's not enough money out there to pay people a living wage, then why are you doing theater? I think that's a good question. We probably wouldn't have any theater in town
Yeah.
if we were wanting to do that, so it's like, how do we value people and still be able to do work, but give them the best value we can, which I
Yeah.
think is like really investing in that human sustainability.
Yeah, I remember in college, someone told me that you either do a show because it feeds your soul, it feeds your resume, or it feeds your bank account.
Mhm.
And I think like theater is so interesting because there's very few industries where that like it
You
kind of
fit
gets back
those.
to that like we define what our own success is,
Yeah.
right? Like only we as individuals can define like what is sustaining me through
I
this.
think in the 25 years that I've been doing theater, there's only been one or two shows that have checked all three boxes.
Right.
And I mean, I've like in the 100+ shows I've done.
Oh, yeah. Like
Most of the time they don't.
when I can like look back at some of my designs and think like what are some of the like shows that I'm proudest of in terms of like my design was really great. It was really thought through. It was really executed really well. Or sometimes the shows that really didn't pay at all.
Mhm.
And so like it is this kind of like again this kind of constant tension that's created with this kind of values that are like somehow aligned but opposed at the same time as well. Because it's like, how do you pay people well? But it's also like you don't want to take away the opportunity because it is community building and fun for people too.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that if you do not have the budget to pay people a living wage, then you have an extra burden of responsibility to be respectful of their time.
I think that's a really great way to say it actually, because like that's where like some of the theater companies where it's like when you start getting into that mindset of like you aren't even paying me enough to treat me this way, that's when it starts the
Yeah.
whole resentment cycle and it's like that's beyond like
Mhm.
unsustainable, right?
Like, we can do this work because we choose to do this work because we enjoy the community that is
Mhm.
created, and we're not getting paid a living wage. We're finding value in it anyway.
Mhm.
If we are being so thoughtful and careful about how we
Mhm.
treat the people who are involved.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
no reason to do a show that doesn't pay well if you're being treated like shit.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, boundaries.
Oh, this is the this so as a sleep coach, I have my clients. I spent a few years sleep coaching when my daughter was young, and before she went to school. It was a part-time gig for me, while I was primary caregiving, and they I because they're not sleeping, because my clients were not sleeping, they're
Mhm.
just like, and they are at like dire straits
Yeah.
because they're so sleep deprived.
Yeah.
They would message me and try to get in touch with me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and 11 o'clock at night, and
Yeah.
they would do all these things, and I would tell them, you can email me whenever, you can message me whenever. I had an app that they would message me on. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter, you can message me whenever. You can expect to hear back from me between 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning and 3:30 and 4:30 in the afternoon. Like,
Mhm.
these are the times when you could expect to hear back from me.
Mhm.
And I would not, even if I saw them, this is where I started this idea of like, if I had a thought or an email I wanted to write and get it out of my brain and write it down, and then I would schedule it to send
Right.
in those times, because setting that boundary, I am teaching them
Mhm.
how they can set boundaries for themselves with their children.
Yeah, and that's one of those like life lessons that it's like it's true in life, but then like also true in theater
Yeah.
too, right? Because it's like again, it's a whole art form that's about humans. And if like setting boundaries is one of the best ways to sustain the humans, you just have to respect the boundaries.
Yeah.
And like sometimes like that's been such a thing to unlearn too. It kind of goes back to like artistic vampire, but
Yeah.
even on like a production team too. Like sometimes I have to tell like another designer, it's like, I want to respect your boundaries. So tell me if this is not a good time to ask this question.
Mhm.
So I think the more that we can normalize that just creates healthier.
And it really does have to come from leadership.
Mhm.
Like the artistic director and the director, what if same person or not the same person, like has to be modeling that behavior of respecting boundaries, because then that is a true trickle down, because then the people who are working on the show all know that boundaries are being respected.
Right. And I think that sometimes the difficult part about boundaries, if you personally aren't used to setting them, is sticking to them yourself
Mm-hmm.
too. Which is hard because I know like I have boundaries with myself that I have to respect too. Because it's like, no, it's 11 o'clock. We're done.
Yes.
We're done. We're not
No
doing the
good email
thing.
is sent at 11 o'clock at night.
Said a really big offender of that. I'm terrible at it. I say that all the
Well,
time.
just the best way to deal with that is to
Mhm.
start practicing like, okay, I'm going to write this thing and then I'm not going to send it now.
Sometimes what I do is I'll send it to myself.
So
So then
schedule it to
so
in the
it's
morning.
written
Yeah.
out,
Hmm.
but then I'll send it later.
Yeah.
So, but yes, boundaries are important for human
Mhm.
sustainability.
There we
No good
go.
email sent after 10 p.m. Yeah, it's just a true thing.
Yeah.
Like, because particularly when I worked in HR, when I would show up at 8 and I would see an 11:30 email, I would just be like, this is not going to be good.
Yeah.
It's never good. It's never good.
It's very important not to expect a response. And you can, if you don't want people to be sending you messages at all hours of the night,
Mhm.
you should not be sending messages at all hours of the night.
Yeah.
And recognizing that time away and time turned off and tuned out is good, healthy rest time.
Yeah, because your brain
Third
just
one, third
does
one,
need to
third.
like not be thinking about things.
Yeah. Mhm.
Materials and humans together. That's it. We made it through the whole slide.
Hooray!
What a journey we've been on. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you'll watch the recording many times and have many takeaways.